My name's David Wortley, and I'm speaking to you today in the capacity of a Vice President of the International Society for Digital Medicine, which was an organisation set up in 2016 in China, who have had a Society for Digital Medicine within China for a number of years. This International Society for Digital Medicine was launched at a conference in 2016, and subsequently I was appointed as an honorary vice president in 2018. What I want to talk to you today is about digital transformation and the implications of that from the pharma sector. I should say right at the very beginning, make it very clear about my involvement with the pharma industry and my qualifications and credibility for talking to you this afternoon. Well, my involvement, I guess, with pharma industry began as far back as 1982, when I was working as a marketing executive at IBM in the General Systems Division based in Nottingham. And it was at that time that I was inspired by a company called Unichem. And I saw in what Unichem were doing in 1982 that there was a shift in how people were using digital technologies, not just as a way of reducing overheads and decreasing the bottom line, increasing profitability like that, but using innovative uses of technology as a mechanism for competitive advantage. So the Unichem example was a great inspiration to me, and what they had done was to set up an arrangement whereby local pharmacists could buy into a scheme or a partnership with Unichem, and this partnership involved the pharmacy buying a little unit which was essentially a little scanner that sat into a cradle with a built-in modem. And so the idea for the pharmacist was that they would simply scan the barcodes of the shelves where they required a replenishment of any drugs or products that they were looking for. They would put this device in the cradle and it would automatically dial Unichem. It would then automatically create an order, and the delivery would be, if the product was in stock, within 24 hours. And this system also automatically generated invoices. And what inspired me about this project was the fact that the pharmacist buying into this project, I think it was £5,000, quite a lot of money in 1982, but for £5,000 they got the equipment, they got the services, but it was a win-win situation whereby Unichem would take the device back if the pharmacy was not satisfied with the service. They would take the device back and they would pay back the £5,000. So the level of risk involved for an individual pharmacy was extremely low. So this was my real first example of the strategic use of digital technologies for competitive advantage. And it was what inspired me to set up my own company in 1984, specializing in the strategic use of technologies, particularly for marketing and business development. And so one of my very earliest customers was Phison's Pharmaceuticals. This was in 1985 when they were based in Loughborough, and they came to one of my seminars at the IBM offices in Nottingham, and they saw me do a presentation using a data projector like the one you see on the right hand side of my screen, and they were so impressed by this that they decided that this is what they wanted to use for an international conference in Lisbon in 1985. And so they commissioned me to take over a compact portable computer like the one you see on the left-hand side, together with a slide presentation that will be shown at this international conference. And in those days, this was something quite revolutionary. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, who of course now are AstraZeneca. And that was an example of an early use of digital presentation technologies to develop corporate image and improve corporate communications. Moving on a good few years, I was providing many services to Pfizer Pharmaceuticals over a good number of years, all related to digital presentation services. But I became involved in what you might describe now as digital therapeutics sometime around 2015. I've been doing quite a bit of work for an Italian serious games company specializing in gamification and technology for health applications. And back in 2015, they developed this digital therapeutics application, which used games technologies, the Microsoft Kinect sensor, to deliver a managed rehabilitation program using a combination of gamification and digital technologies. And essentially what it allowed physiotherapists to do was to create their own gamified rehabilitation plan that's customized to the individual patient. And this was a plan, a rehabilitation plan, that could then be delivered to the patient in their own home using a plug and play device that they would connect to their television. And all of the data about the rehabilitation program and the progress of the patient was captured and fed into the rehabilitation plan in the clinic. So it was an early example of telemedicine, and it was an early example of how you can provide clinical support remotely. And of course, in 2015, this was long before coronavirus, but with the advent of coronavirus, you can see how a technology like this, which enables these services to be delivered remotely, is something which is going to be very much needed in today's COVID lockdown environment. So also 2015, this was the date when the International Society of Digital Medicine was launched at an international conference in Nanjing in China. And that's when I became involved seriously in the use of digital technologies for medical applications. I had been involved as a practitioner before that, going back to 2013. I've used wearable technologies as a way of managing my own personal health, and I've seen the benefits of combining gamification strategies with wearable technologies to make a substantial improvement into my physical and mental health through a program of exercise and improved diet. So that's a little bit about my background. I want to begin by just talking about some of the digital challenges for the pharma industry. So when you're looking at the use of digital technologies rather than drugs or vaccines, the digital environment poses some additional problems when it comes to protecting intellectual property. I think these will be obvious to anybody watching this who's involved in the pharma industry. Delivering services digitally does present different problems if you're trying to protect intellectual property. The second challenge is to do with the use of clinical trials and certification. In the pharma industry, you're very used to the processes involved in massive investment in research and development, bringing drugs to market, having long-term clinical trials. Admittedly, COVID-19 has changed that somewhat, but having long clinical trials and then getting the drugs certified as a result of these clinical trials. With some of the digital therapeutics and other devices that are based around pharmacy, non-drug, non-vaccine interventions, there are additional challenges when it comes to recognizing the fact that these technologies can be used for clinical benefits. So there are challenges around doing the clinical trials to verify that and getting FDA and CE mark certification in Europe. One of the other challenges, I think, is what I'll come on to a little bit later, and that's to do with the consumerization of digital technologies. I will demonstrate in my presentation how technologies used within clinical practices have really evolved from being technologies which were primarily proprietary. They were dumb and they were unconnected, and they were designed and used by medical professionals. Today, an increasing number of medical grade devices are now available to the general public. And this presents, again, some challenges for the pharma industry that I'll go into in a bit more detail later. This also means that the pharma industry is going to see entrants from non-pharma competition. And these are organizations, large and small, that may not have a background in vaccines and drugs and pharmaceutical practices, but will be entering and competing with pharma industries by the supply of digital medicine products and services. Another challenge of today's digital technologies is the fact that consumers, through access to the internet, wearable devices, and a range of modern digital technologies, are increasingly aware and savvy about medical conditions and their treatments. And it's not unusual for patients to go to doctors armed with a lot of information which they've gathered on the internet or which they might have collected from their own wearable devices. And so when they talk to the doctor, it's not in the position of a layman. And in some cases, if their condition is particularly rare, they may well go to the physician with, in inverted commas, more knowledge and experience than the general practitioner has. Obviously, when you're starting to deliver services digitally, or even when you're developing solutions and you're using digital technologies to support the development of drugs and vaccines, you've got to be increasingly aware of cybersecurity. And also in that context, I can see that high-level staff, high-level creative staff, the people that are really driving innovation and developments within the pharmaceutical industry are going to be very precious. And I can see some challenges arising around retaining those high-level staff in this environment. So, looking at today, obviously coronavirus is a big game changer. I live in the UK, I'm living here at the moment. Fortunately, I'm in a situation where I'm living in the countryside, so I'm not living in an urban environment. So I'm not confined to a small flat. I can actually go out into the countryside, and the risk of contracting coronavirus by not coming into contact with other people, the risk is very low. But what I see about coronavirus and pharma is that it's a tremendous opportunity for the pharma industry, because today life sciences and pharma are really at the heart of our global futures. They have so much influence over such a wide range of aspects of business and society that I think for many years to come, the pharma industry is going to be a dominant force in the way business and life is conducted. And I've shown the pictures of three individuals on the screen there. You probably recognise at least two of them, Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, and Matt Hancock on the right-hand side, who is our Health Secretary. You may also, if you're in the UK, recognise Jonathan Van Tam, who's a medical officer and takes part in the briefings that the UK government gives on the progress of lockdown and vaccination and all the other things. I put Jonathan Van Tam's picture up there, not just because he's very much involved in shaping the policy with regard to lockdown, but it also happens that he went to the same school as me. We both went to Boston Grammar School. He came a little bit after UK regarding lockdown. So his influence affects many different things that go beyond addressing the challenges of coronavirus. So what I see is a very rosy digital future for pharma, involving the use of genomics technologies, big data analytics, the use of these technologies to deliver precision medicine, designer drugs and vaccines, a greater involvement in the economy, not just the national economy, but the global economy. And because of the importance of, as we've seen in the UK, the emergence of mutations of the coronavirus, increasingly importantly, the effect of the digital technologies within the pharma industry and the power that it gives pharmaceutical companies to really do different tweaks on the vaccine therapies that address the mutations in these viruses. I think this is a national security issue, which is going to be strongly influenced by the pharma industry. And of course, a lot of the policies that we see in the UK today are driven by simulations and modelling. So everything I hope that I've shown you so far illustrates that, of course, there are challenges when you're working with digital medicine technologies that you are probably not used to historically, but you're in a good position as far as all of your traditional practices and the use of digital technologies basically to extend those practices in the development of new drugs, vaccines and interventions. So you might ask yourself, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I put this picture of someone standing on the edge of the cliff because I believe that pre-COVID, there were a number of challenges and opportunities which now possibly are being put on the back burner because they're not so important. But I hope that my presentation will illustrate some of these challenges and opportunities that are unrelated to the current coronavirus situation, but are more endemic within public health and do require some interventions, knowledge and understanding from the pharma industries. So if we look at the top causes of death, these show the primary causes of death and how they changed between 1900 and 1997. And there's a website called Death Meters, which I won't assign any credibility to. It just happens to align reasonably well with the current causes of death. But the point is that we are now moving from an environment where we're shifting from death from communicable diseases towards non-communicable diseases, NCDs. And a lot of the causes of mortality today are to do with our lifestyle. So if we look at some of the charts that I show on the screen there, we can see that as a result of a lot of the work that's done by the pharma industry, we've been able to increase life expectancy across the whole world very substantially. If you go back to 1770, I didn't realize it until I saw this graph, that around about 1770 life expectancy was around about 35, but today you can see that in Europe it's around about 80 years old, and in Africa that's the lowest, is around about 58. But once it's been happening, it means that people are living longer, but it also means that people are becoming ill as they live past the pensionable age. And so the number of ratio of workers to pensioners is dramatically decreasing. So if you combine this phenomena of the aging population with the level of per capita healthcare cost by age, you realize that the aging society is a major societal problem. And everyone, I think, is aware of the problem of obesity, and in the UK, Sir Simon Stevens, who's head of the NHS, has constantly described obesity as being something like a cliff edge that we are gradually moving towards, that if we don't do something about it soon, our public health services will become unsustainable. And this is obviously a non-communicable disease, and it is a result of lifestyle behaviors. So these problems related to lifestyle are growing. We also today have increasingly a challenge on drug dependency, and some of the problems related to resistance to antibiotics, etc., and comorbidity. And of course, in the USA, there are quite a few problems to do with addiction to antidepressive drugs. In my own situation, just to add a little personal note to this, is that living with myself and my partner, we have my 96-year-old father of my partner. He's living with us because he is unable to look after himself. And he has an A4 page list of drugs that he has to take. And this combination of drugs is extremely difficult to manage. And so I can see, with even slight tweaks in the drugs that he's taking, is causing a lot of different side effects. So this dependence on drugs and comorbidity and addiction is something that the pharma industry really needs to get involved in. And what I want to look at potentially is the role that digital technologies can play in opening up opportunities for the pharma industry to develop interventions and therapies which are not dependent on drugs and vaccines. So are there any alternative drugs and vaccines? And if there are, what is the role of digital medicine? Well, this is a slide that I showed yesterday in a presentation on the future of artificial intelligence. And what it shows is the role that technology plays traditionally in the doctor-patient relationship. So the human intelligence that you find in both doctor and patient, combined with technology, is used to identify clinical problems, devise therapies which the patients can buy into, and obviously result in many different cases in interventions, either through surgery or through drug and vaccine therapies. So the point is that for most of human history, health and well-being has been managed by this combination of human intelligence with the doctor and the patient, supported by technologies which provide the data upon which diagnosis and treatment is based. But the implication of this is that we don't so much have a national health service. What we've got is a national sickness service, because people only come to their doctor, only get involved with the medical profession when something goes wrong. So even if you look at vaccines and you see vaccines as a preventative healthcare situation, I would argue that the pharmaceutical industry and the way in which national health services run are primarily being based upon cure rather than prevention. So looking at the characteristics of medicine before artificial intelligence, as I already indicated, medical technologies in the past have been proprietary, specially designed for the medical profession, and they've been unconnected. And as I've just indicated, health services were not really health services, they're more to do with sickness services. And in that environment, clinicians and medical professionals required a substantial amount of training and skill to be able to interpret vital science data and make their prescriptions. And so patients were almost totally dependent on medical professionals for their health care. And it's going to be a little bit more relevant as I go through the presentation, the involvement or the business model for health insurance, which has been based on mortality and public health statistics. So what I would like you to do now is to exercise your imagination and think in terms of the human body and human health being analogous to car health. So what I show on the screen now is a picture of an older car. It's a 1950s MG that used to be owned by my partner. And on the right-hand side, you can see the MG Mini, which is the car that I drive now. So what has been the impact of digital technologies on cars? Well, if we continue the analogy, a car, our body is like a car that helps us navigate through life's journey. And when we look at life's journey, it's like a journey from the cradle to the grave. We do know what our starting point is, and that is when we're born, and we know what the final destination is when we die. And we know some of the places en route, but we've really no idea how long this journey is going to last, and whether it's going to be a pleasant journey and whether it's going to be an easy route and a difficult route. So if our body is the journey vehicle, and its condition determines where we are on that journey, the nature of the journey and how long it's going to last, most of us don't really know or understand or monitor our body's condition or maintain it. We just know that when something goes wrong, we need to bring in a medical professional. So that's very little different from how it used to be or how it is still with automotives. So if you look at the Humber Snipe on the left-hand side, that was the same type of car my uncle had. He was the first person in our street to have the war, to do a whole range of things. And they were totally reliant on human skills to get the best from the car. And they relied on knowledge professionals, such as the garage mechanic, to fix their problems. So the consequence of this lack of technology and lack of reliability in older cars that meant that the maintenance and the care of older cars, the condition of where we are, give us guidance on how to get to our destination, can make adjustments if we go off track, and even fix problems when they detect them, or at least alert us to go to the garage when it's needed. So what we're seeing today is our human skill and intelligence enabled by some of the digital technologies. So the impact of the digital technology and artificial intelligence on the medical profession some of them are these. Medical devices have become smarter, more connected and affordable. Diagnostics have become more precise and reliable. the intelligence required to be able to visualize and interpret vital signs data become embedded in devices. And the consequence of that is patients are less reliant on medical professionals in understanding the state of their own health. And it's having an impact on clinicians, doctors, nurses, needing less training, arguably, but a different skill set. And these digital technologies are now helping to shift the focus away from interventions, medical interventions, towards preventative healthcare that goes beyond simply vaccines and drugs. So to express it in a graph form, for most of human history, certainly during my lifetime, the technologies that we use were in the bottom left-hand corner. They were used by professionals. They were focused on clinicians and medical professionals. They were proprietary, dumb, and unconnected. They were not used by consumers because they weren't available or affordable to consumers. But today we have generic technologies, including technologies that very much come into the health domain. They are intelligent and can be used to interpret data, and they are connected. So we're going from this digital consumerization is taken from a situation where we've got clinician-focused technologies to citizen-focused technologies. So this consumerization of digital technologies, you can see the technologies that traditionally and are still used within the medical profession at the top, and in the bottom you can see some of their digital equivalents, which are no longer the domain, sole domain of the doctor, but increasingly they are either used by citizens to do their own interpretation, or in cases like the oxytone device on the right hand side, they are used to provide telemedicine solutions that help doctors remotely support their patients. So these technologies are very disruptive. And currently, I think primarily the focus on artificial intelligence technologies are to do with empowering human beings rather than replacing human beings. But they do have some significant implications. Example, robotic surgery. In the hands of a skilled surgeon, surgical practices can be less invasive and far more precise than they have been in the past. But it also means that if you look at the picture on the right, which is of my partner Jackie, who's at a conference stand at a conference on medical technologies some years ago, and she's using a laparoscopic surgery training tool to remove a gallstone. Now, she has no medical training whatsoever. She's not a games player or a traditioner or a games practitioner. In fact, she's really a technology Luddite. But despite all of that, she was able to use this laparoscopic simulation and get some results in this exercise that were actually better than some trainee surgeons. So these AI technologies are having a significant impact in empowering citizens. They're also increasingly in devices being embedded into human beings. So, and this is something that has a direct relevance to the pharma industry. So by incorporating very high level and accurate digital devices that measure something like blood sugar levels, you can link those to a device like an insulin pump within the body, so that you have technology then which automatically dispenses drugs and therapy without the patient having to change their behavior. So increasingly we're seeing embedded intelligent devices as mechanisms for controlling our health. So going back to digital therapeutics, These are non-vaccine and non-drug interventions designed not only to improve health or even to make clinical interventions to tackle problems in a non-drug way. Increasingly, some of these therapies are being developed by people outside the medical profession. I've shown a couple of examples there. The use of technology linked to a smartphone designed to give people exercises. On the left-hand side, I think cybertherapy, the rehabilitation technologies like the rehability product that I showed at the beginning of my presentation, using virtual reality and immersive environments for stress management, phobias, and a range of different mental conditions. Industry. So I tried to put it as succinctly as possible and say that the biggest challenge and opportunity for the pharma sector is how it can embrace the digital technologies for health and well-being while still protecting public health, and to do it in a holistic way. By that I mean that is in a way that takes into account the whole picture. So in the case of coronavirus, we already know, and increasingly brought to our attention, the fact that many people with existing conditions like cancer and medical problems are not going to their physician because of the coronavirus and the load that's placing on the health service. These are the questions that I want to leave you with, really, and that is to ask you, how can the pharma industry shape the future of public health policy using digital medicine? And what kind of partnerships and collaboration can be enabled by digital technologies in a digital health ecosystem? And how can pharma address some of the challenges of comorbidity and drug dependence? And what part will digital therapeutics play in the future? That concludes my presentation. So I'm now going to stop my screen sharing and go back to the screen and ask if there are any questions that anybody has typed in, any questions that anybody wants me to answer live.